second, then we're going to make it spooky. So, I just want to give a quick welcome. I'm Amy Catania. I'm the Executive Director here at Historic Saranac Lake. Some of you know me, and some of you I have never met, which makes me very happy to see new faces here. So welcome to the museum. If you've never been here before, I want to invite you to come back. We have pay what you can admission during Carnival. We're open through tomorrow and up through Saturday night because we're going to be in the parade. But anyway, lots of fun stuff going on, so thank you for being here. We're so excited about this talk. I'm so excited about our new staff member, Alex, who is absolutely fabulous. He's been the man about town during Carnival this whole time. He's going to introduce our speaker tonight, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out for Historic Saranac Lake. If you are not a member, please join us. I have some membership envelopes over there. If you would like to know more about our museum expansion to the big blue building next door, that is happening. We have a brochure. You can dedicate a brick if you want to be a part of that. We even have a donation box over at the corner over there by the skeleton. So we're always happy to take your support that helps us do what we do. But welcome for being here tonight, and I want to give a quick shout out to our special guest student who has inspired so many creepy things here for us, our guest Lydia. So Lydia, can you wave your hand? Francis just knows all sorts of things about creepy, cool stuff, and she wrote a letter to the paper that inspired us and Alex to do a really great exhibit upstairs and our parade float, and Lydia's a special guest on our parade float on Saturday. So yay for Lydia. And yay for all of you guys who are excited about this upcoming speech tonight, or talk tonight. So I'm going to pass over to you. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, wow, what a crowd tonight. So thank you guys so much for coming to this talk. You never know what kind of turnout you're going to get, and holy man, I think that we would need a whole other room to kind of accommodate. So thank you for coming out tonight. As Amy said, my name is Alex. I'm the public programs coordinator here, so we do all sorts of fun things, tours, talks, other stuff. If you're interested in working with people, I'm the guy that you want to talk to. So, just keep my face in line. I know I look like I'm a fisherman or something tonight. I've been standing at the Winter Carnival, the Winter Carnival Sea Pow for the last few days. So, ugh. But without further ado, my appearance aside, all right, we're here to hear one person talk tonight. Carolyn Greenberg came to Amy about a year ago and started talking about doing some research about some spooky stories, paranormal investigations, ghost stories, that kind of stuff. And she's been hard at work on acquiring these over the last year with the goal of making a forthcoming book.
Yes,
right?
That's the long-term goal.
That's the long-term goal. So if you have stories, we're going to spend some time afterwards. We're going to give you a little bit of an opportunity to talk to Carolyn, maybe get your information to her so she can start capturing your stories as well if she hasn't already. All right?
Yeah, I forgot I brought a handout too. So I don't think I have enough for everybody, but if, Alex, you can, this is a glossary of paranormal terms. So that's just for everybody. It also has, the reason I thought of it though was that it has my email on it. So if you do have stories that you'd like to share with me that you think would be a good addition to the Spirits of Saranac Lake book that I'm hoping to put together, then please email me, and we can set up a phone call or an in-person meeting or whatever. And that's how I actually acquired the stories that I'm sharing tonight. So I've met some really great people, and I look forward to meeting more.
So with that being said, let's put our hands together, give her a really warm welcome. At least like 10 people, because I knew at least some of the people I was talking about were going to come out tonight, but this is just beyond. So thank you so much for coming out and taking time out of your carnival week. My name is Carolyn Greenberg, and I'm thrilled. I'm almost welling up over it. This is fantastic. So I also want to thank Historic Saranac Lake for welcoming me. And it's because I'm so happy that you invited me to come and to present this. I want to thank the wonderful people that have shared their stories. And there are several of you in the audience tonight, so the pressure's on a little bit. I want to do a good job. And I also want to say thank you to the people who maybe have passed on before us
whose stories are going to be told tonight. I hope that I do honor to all of them, to all of you, that I tell your stories with respect and as much accuracy as I possibly can. Now, can everybody see the screen? It's more important you can see some of my visuals than that you can see me. I tend to be like a walk around the room kind of presenter. I can't get out my nervous energy that way. Everybody can see okay? Yeah. Awesome. All right, so we're going to get started. So my husband, John, and I came to Saranac Lake. Go. Okay, Alex, now you need to step in. Make that go. I can do it like this. So we came for the first time in about 2018, and we've been Adirondack visitors. What am I not doing?
You're good now.
Okay. We've been Adirondack visitors my entire life. So we've been coming up since I was a little girl, and we've gone lots and lots of places. And in 2018, though, we decided to come to Saranac Lake. And we were not looking to make this a long-term commitment, but we immediately fell in love with this place. It was weird almost. John turned to me, he's like, this just feels like home. I don't understand. Like this, I've never felt that way about a place we've vacationed in before. And that actually is a bit of a recurring theme to some of our stories tonight. This idea that, people just feel drawn to this place. It turned out that our house was for sale. Both years, we rented it in 2018 and we rented it in 2019. And they asked us to show the house. So like the owner said, if you guys don't mind, can you show the house when people come? And I wanted to do like a Brady Bunch on them, and like make it spooky. Like the people who are older in the room will get what I'm saying. Like I'm going to scare them away. Although I have a feeling for the people in this room that would not necessarily not be a selling point. That might be a selling point. But long story short, here we are. And we are part-time residents of Saranac Lake. We still live in New Jersey also where our children are. We haven't been able to break away from them yet, but we're working on it. So you never know. But we joined right in. I'm a member of the Artworks. We do stuff with Hamlets to Huts. I started Mountain Melodies Music Camp, which you might have heard of for children. So we've gotten really involved, and I started volunteering for HSL because I'm obsessed with the history here in Saranac Lake immediately. See, I didn't know anything about it when I came here, but now I have tons of books and I've gotten really into it. And another thing when we would go on vacation is I always would look for the local ghost book. And I noticed there was no local ghost book here in Saranac Lake that was really dedicated to Saranac Lake. There's an Adirondack one, there's a Lake Placid one, there are others, but I thought, well, I can fix that. Maybe I'm going to create a ghost book. That would be so exciting because I've always loved those kinds of books and these kinds of stories. So I did go to Amy, and luckily I'd already been volunteering for like 2 years, so she was like, okay, I know you, it's all right. And she was very supportive and immediately started connecting me with people, and some of the people that whose stories I'm going to be sharing tonight. So how many people here are locals? Raise your hand if you're a local, like you live in town or around town. Okay, put your hands down. Raise your hand if you're new to town, you're not from around here. Not too many. All right, just a few people. So okay, so I'm not going to go too heavy into the history. That's good for me to know. But what tonight's going to be about, oh wait, hold on. Are there any ghosts or spirits in the room?
Several.
All right, and there are people in here who know. So that's good to know as well. So tonight is going to be about storytelling. We all have stories to tell. Stories are really like the fabric of what brings our communities together. And through researching this book, I've discovered how important it is. What happened? Go back. It's the ghost. I've discovered how important it is for people to tell their stories and for people to tell their stories about paranormal encounters. Now, if you got that handout that did it get passed around? Do you guys have it? Oh, yeah, we're going to pass that around. I might be using some terminology during the talk tonight that if you could check, you might be able to look up a few things like what exactly I'm talking about. I will try to describe everything as I go, but if you hear me use a term and you're not sure what I'm talking about, it might be on there. Anyway, as I said in the title, I'm going to be telling real stories, and what I mean by that is I'm telling you the stories that people shared with me. I'm not going to fictionalize them. I'm not going to change them to make them more exciting or make them make more sense or anything like that. I really want to honor people's stories as they are. And I also want to include historical research and context wherever I can, because I think like the best paranormal story is the one that's connected to the past and connected to the people of the past. So I will try to fill in those blanks for you guys. This is a quote from, I'm blocking it because I'm walking in front of the light, which isn't too smart. This is a quote from Adelaide Crapsey, who was a famous poet who cured here, and it's not, that's Maya Angelou. What is happening? I'm having technological problems. Yeah, it goes. There's one remembers, one still mourns, for the forgotten dead are dead indeed. So I feel like the stories of those of the past deserve to be told and remembered also. Now, I don't see it as my job to prove that people's stories are quote-unquote true. In fact, with anything related to the paranormal, that's often very difficult to do. So I'm going to leave that deciding whether to believe up to you. There may be some hard skeptics in the room, and I'm sure there are some enthusiastic believers and plenty of people in between, but I invite you to listen with open minds, and hopefully by the end of the night, you're going to have some stories that you maybe are still skeptical. I mean, I shouldn't say hopefully, but perhaps by the end of the night, you may be skeptical about some of these stories by the end of the night, or you might find some stories really rocked you, and that's great. That's just part of the fun. But we'll all be a little closer for having shared these stories together. So I think since most people are from Saranac Lake, you're pretty familiar with the town. We're known for the outdoor life, for recreation, for the art, the music, and all the wonderful things that happen, the wonderful food and lodging in town. But it began with Edward Livingston Trudeau, who came here as a doctor who was ill himself with tuberculosis. And he loved it here. So when he came up here, he actually thought he was going to die. But then he rested, he found hospitality from Paul Smith, among other places in town, and he found that his tuberculosis actually got better, which inspired him to find out more about the disease and to share this technique of helping people get better with the world. So his vision did come to fruition. Over time, he built up a wonderful sanatorium that welcomed people from all over the world and treated tuberculosis patients. He also was one of the first doctors to really understand what caused tuberculosis, that it was caused by a bacterium. People thought it was caused by anything from moral failure. They thought it was hereditary. Some people thought it was caused by vampires, that the people who had tuberculosis were actually vampires. So there were all kinds of crazy theories out there. But his methods of reclining and curing on cure porches is something that became a big part of the culture and the architecture of Saranac Lake. So I'm sure you've all seen and perhaps live in homes around town that have these wide open porches where people could convalesce out and breathe in the fresh air and help to not necessarily cure their tuberculosis, but certainly helped a lot of people, particularly those that weren't extremely sick before they started the rest cure, were able to get better. Now keep in mind that unlike COVID-19, the most severely affected age group of TB patients was not the elderly, it was actually young people. So thousands of people suffered and died here. And there were even stories of coffins being delivered and stacked up at the train station at Union Station just a few blocks from here to be shipped out in the cover of night, so as not to frighten those and discourage those who were still hoping for a successful outcome. This is actually in front of the Noyes Cottage. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but this picture is in front of a cottage that's in town that's still standing. But Trudeau's treatment was effective for a lot of people, and a lot of people made a full recovery. And some people, after they got better, chose to spend the rest of their lives here. And some maybe even chose to spend their afterlife here. So we're going to be getting to the ghost stories shortly. This is a beautiful picture of the Winter Carnival Palace back in the early days of the carnival. And the carnival, I don't know if you know this, but it was created in the first place to entertain the tuberculosis patients. And I believe that the culture of art and music and great hospitality and food that is so prevalent in this town is also a vestige of that hospitality, that this town, one of the only towns in the country, not the only one, but one of the only ones, that they welcomed people so wonderfully. So here we go. We're going to get to our first story. You're like, all right, Carolyn, just get to it. We're here to hear the stories. So, oh, okay. John's telling me that I'm blocking the camera, but that's okay. So, my first story comes to me from a woman named Melissa. And she was very sensitive to spirits, and both her parents were too. This is not unusual. When I say sensitive, I mean that she has like a heightened awareness of spiritual energy. It's also in your handout if you want to see how I define it there. She shared a couple stories about cleaning a house in Saranac Lake, and she would see shadows peeking around corners, and no one was there. She experienced a visitation from her grandfather after he passed. She knew that her pony died before her pony died. Like, her father woke her up in the morning and she knew what he was about to tell her. So she'd had a lot of experiences like that. Now, in 2020, she was at Carnival Fireworks with her husband and their 2 children. So they watched the fireworks, and they had the children, they were little guys, like very little, old enough to talk, but maybe let's say like 3 and 5 or something like that. And they had them on a sleigh. And they lived up at the top of Helen Hill, and they were getting ready to leave, and they realized that the traffic on Shepherd Avenue was a nightmare. And we've all seen that. We actually experienced that a couple of nights ago. It was bad. Couldn't even drive up it. And they were certainly not going to pull their children up the hill on a sleigh with all of that traffic. So they decided to take a detour. What did I do? There it goes. Yeah, it's the people who know the area knew what I was going to say. They decided they were going to bring the children through Pine Ridge Cemetery. And as Melissa said, what could go wrong? They had small babies, nothing could possibly happen. So they had just entered the cemetery, and she looked off to the left, and she saw a street light. And she was like, okay, and there was a couple houses by the ridge there. And then she kept looking, and that's when she saw something very strange. She noticed that under the streetlight, there was a man dancing like a maniac. She said it was just like going completely crazy. He was dancing and flailing and just sort of wildly moving underneath the streetlight. And her initial reaction was, this is a carnival reveler, and his wife is about to walk out of one of those houses and grab him by the collar and be like, get back in the house right now. But that didn't happen. She just kept seeing, this is my dramatic recreation, obviously, but she kept seeing him, and she said to her husband, do you see that? And he's like, what? She said, that man dancing under the streetlight. And he looked to the streetlight, he didn't see a thing. So that freaked her out. She's like, we have to leave, and we have to leave now. And her husband's like, no, hold on. He gets out his cell phone, and he started taking pictures, and she's like, hurry up. So he took a couple of pictures of where she was looking, and they headed home. When they got home, she asked her children, did you see anything there? And the children said, oh yeah, Mommy, we saw a light. And she said, okay, well that's the same as your father. He saw the street light, but they didn't see the man. Now, the next day, her husband took out his phone, and he looked at it, and he looked at his pictures, and he had taken like a burst of photos. And this is what he saw, right where Melissa had seen the man dancing. You see like that, it's tiny, but you see like that flickering light, like an orb moving in circles. So that's what his camera saw. Then Melissa checked back with her children, and she said, now you said you saw a light last night. What did you see? They said, oh, Mommy, we saw a light. It was just like Tinkerbell, and it moved. It was very tiny. So they saw an orb, and this is something that happens when people do paranormal investigations. They will see an orb that a lot of people attribute to spirit activity, that was evidence that she was seeing something, an anomaly for sure. Her husband didn't see it. Now he did epilogue, he did go back the next day, he looked to see if there was anything there that would reflect light or anything like that, and he didn't see anything. There was nothing there to explain it. Now my next story is I call Fred. Now, Fred was one of the first stories that I heard. Amy Catania connected me with a lovely couple, Eileen and John, who also live up on Helen Hill. And which almost all the stories tonight, take place up there. Yeah, a lot of my stories do. I'm not sharing every story I've collected, but we have a good collection tonight, and most of them do take place up there. So this story takes place in a house that's on, I think, Charles Street or Charles Avenue or whatever, Charles something. Street, Avenue? Doesn't matter. Charles Street. Anyway, so what would happen was they moved into this house in the 80s. And from time to time, when they were sitting in this house, in their house, which you can see is an old cure cottage, they would be sitting in the living room and they would look to the right out the side windows. And they would see a man walk by. And Eileen would describe him as a dapper dresser, that he looked like maybe he was from the 20s, maybe the 20s or the 30s. And she nicknamed him Fred because she had a real fondness for Fred Astaire. And the man reminded her of Fred Astaire. So all of the family saw this from time to time over time. Her husband saw it. Her children saw it. One time they were there with a friend, and she jumped up and she went to go to the back door and answer it. And they're like, "What are you doing?" She said, "I see a man out there. I'm going to go answer the door and see who it is." And they knew immediately. They said, "There's not anybody going to be there." And she went to the door. Sure enough, nobody was there. So once again, it was Fred. So this is the pathway that Fred would walk up. Now, there was at one time, when they first built the house, an apartment in the back, and there was a staircase and a cure porch in the back of the house. So they theorized that maybe Fred was walking to his house or walking up to that apartment. It's my dramatic recreation of Fred. So even though these stories were uncanny, they weren't frightening. In fact, her husband said, Fred was the kind of guy that made you want to jump up and answer the door. And that's exactly what their friend did. So in about somewhere in the mid-90s, they did a renovation on the house. And as part of the renovation, they removed the back apartment, they closed up that back door, and they expanded their kitchen and they eliminated access to any of that. And one day they were sitting in the living room where they would always see Fred, and they saw Fred again through the window, but he was facing in the other direction. And he walked backwards down the sidewalk in the opposite direction that they'd ever seen him walk. And they never saw him again. So, one might say that the Fred who walked up the sidewalk time and time again was something we call residual energy. It's energy that's kind of imprinted in a space. It can happen time and time again, almost like a loop playing, like a video loop playing. It'll happen over and over again. But when Fred turned around, it made me think, well, that wasn't residual. That's like an intelligent reaction. That's a spirit reacting to his environment. So maybe he was actually a sentient ghost or an intelligent ghost, or maybe he was both. We don't really know. But I did find something out doing research for this, that there was a man, and actually, Amy, you had this in your article too. There was a man who built the house and lived there. His name was Arthur Stroh, and he came to town for his wife and his daughter to cure, and that's why he built the house. And Arthur died in a tragic car accident. I mean, it was really pretty horrific. They were in a car similar to this. This is not Arthur. This is just a facsimile of what his car might have looked like in the time. They were out on the Bloomingdale Road, and they drove off the road. They think they were confused by fog. The car flipped over. The women and the children were ejected, but they survived. But Arthur and his friend did not. In fact, they didn't even find Arthur right away because he was underneath the car. They didn't know he was there. And there was a massive car fire. He was burned beyond recognition. Now, I don't personally believe that you have to have, like, a tragic death is the only reason why ghosts occur. I don't think that that's true. I'm not sure if Arthur is even connected to Fred, but it could be that Arthur is actually who Fred was, returning home to his house time and time again. We don't really know for sure. But I thought that was just an interesting little epilogue. And then there's another ending to the story. I'm going to advance. I found Eileen's house on what they call the Sanborn maps. And that's her house. So you see number 6 there with the arrow? The arrow represents Fred's path, the way Fred would always walk. And when I showed this to Eileen, and this was just like last week, she said, oh, none of those buildings were there when we moved in, the ones with the green dots. And she said, and we even had an oil tank and pipelines that seemed to go back to buildings that are no longer there. So she said, maybe Fred lived in those buildings. That was sort of some interesting historical fact that might explain who Fred was and where he lived. All right, Paranormal Porch. You like my titles? Okay, we're going to stay on Helen Hill a bit. So, a lovely person in the room here named Kelly emailed me. You guys may know Kelly. Kelly, raise your hand. There she is. Kelly is very active in town. I saw Kelly speak at a Pride event, gives a lot back to this town. And she's been here for around 40 years. She's clearly spiritually sensitive, and she's had several different experiences in her home, and I'm going to share a few of those tonight. So this is Kelly's home on Helen Hill, and she came here as a young adult, and she had sort of an experience like we did, where all of a sudden we just had this weird draw to the town. She was at a party across the street, and she saw this house, and she felt inexplicably drawn to the house. And she was just like, that's the house. And she ended up buying that house. The house ended up, the woman there was looking for tenants, and she ended up, was it tenants? She was looking, yeah, so she was looking for tenants. She ended up moving into the house and then ultimately ended up buying that house. And Kelly's a talented woodworker. She's lovingly restored the house and really brought it back to very similar condition to its original condition. And it's a very charming house. There's lots of original woodwork, beautiful diamond pane windows and original sconces. And it's really quite lovely. Now, Kelly lived alone. She now has lots of dogs. You're going to see a lot of Pomeranian presence in these pictures. Kelly sent me these pictures. But the experience, one of the first experiences that Kelly's had was only when she would be alone. She did have children who would visit, but they were not there at the time. And Kelly would lay in bed and she would hear the footsteps of a child. And the child would come to the edge of the bed and run around the bed. And she would see kind of like a vision of a little girl's head. So she had a sense that it was a little girl and that it was, that there was a certain height that was similar to her daughter at the time, like maybe 4 or 5 years old. She said it was never a negative experience, but it's something that did happen again and again. And then I'm going to tell a little more about the little girl in a second, but another thing that would happen occasionally with Kelly, she'd be lying in bed and someone would lay down next to her and drape an arm over her. She described it, whoa. She described this very clearly. She's like, the feeling like you feel like the bed kind of sink down and then would have this feeling of this arm draping over her. She said it was strange, a little scary, because like when you're laying alone in bed to have someone lay down next to you and not be there, that's a little scary. So, but again, not like terrifying, nothing terribly dark or threatening. And she could make out the outline of a face. She didn't have the dogs yet, so it wasn't them. And then another experience Kelly would have, she would be laying in bed, and this was usually like in twilight, like in the morning, and people would be standing around her bed, shoulder to shoulder, and she could see kind of their translucent outline. These were adults. And she had a sense that like they were family or maybe like trying to help her in some way. And she also had a sense that they were trying to perhaps operate on her. So we would say like Kelly is, if we're talking about the different clair senses, like she is clair cognizant. She's she kind of knows things. Like she didn't hear this out loud per se, but this is not see people taking out their glossary. I'm a teacher at heart. I'm like, look at your glossaries. Everything must be an educational experience. So, but she just had this sense, she knew that this is what they were trying to do. And I said to Kelly, well, did you consider that these could have been medical personnel? And you hadn't really, right? You said not, I mean, they said they wanted to operate, but I meant like maybe like tuberculosis doctors or nurses could be standing around you because she said they wanted to implant something in my chest. And I said, well, that was consistent with treatment. They would inject gas into people's chest cavities to collapse their lungs. And maybe that, I mean, I was just speculating, like what could explain this? So, and it turns out that Kelly's bed it didn't used to be a bedroom, it used to be a cure porch. So you can see the transom windows that were decorative features of that porch, let a little outside light into the hallway. So she would be laying perhaps right where somebody would have been curing on a porch. So maybe those translucent people. Go ahead, you want to add something?
Because that conversation, I mean, obviously I thought about after you left.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to thinking, considering how I got here. And rather than being a spiritual, was that a past life memory?
Maybe, yeah.
So I really thought about what we had to say.
Right.
Was that a past life memory? Why I'm here, why that happened, why I'm in that room.
You're so
why I'm
drawn
in
to
this
that house.
Past life. It's like, this is like really interesting.
Really, it's very interesting, fun thing to consider. Yeah, I wonder that sometimes too. When I'm so obsessed with this town and its history and everything about it. Like, why is that? Like, what's the connection? So, moving on. Okay, so Kelly also had an interaction with an intelligent spirit. I'm going to back up one more. And it was a little girl, and the little girl was wearing a red velvet dress when she would see it, and the little girl introduced herself. She said her name was Cinnamon. And Kelly also had the sense of like maybe the name Marie and Cindy and the number 3. So like these images were coming to her. I don't have a picture of Cinnamon, and I didn't try to make one up.
She's the first one on the bed.
Oh, well, I know. Yes. So Kelly felt that this was maybe a sign that she would be having another child in her lifetime, and that maybe Cinnamon or Cindy was trying to tell her, I'm going to be your 3rd child. But then another child interacted with her and said, they killed Cindy. Cindy's gone. And that was a very disappointing and sad moment for you, Kelly. You said that it was almost something you mourned over, that there would not be this new, another child coming. But the little puppy on the bed is now named Cinnamon Marie. So that is definitely, Kelly loves her pups like a child, like her own children, and that's very, very clear. A couple more things in Kelly's experiences. One was she had an experience where she heard the front door open and then footsteps up the stairs and footsteps down the hall, and a black aura was above her bed. And she found that experience, unlike these other previous experiences, were never threatening. This was very threatening. This was very upsetting. She didn't like the feeling, the dark color, the black. Black is not usually a positive color in the spirit world. So she was compelled to go to her priest in town and have the house blessed. And after that, the spirit activity just stopped completely. With one exception, different kind of spirit. So, Kelly, you're going to have to forgive my dramatic representation.
No,
here.
you're doing great. You're doing good.
I used a little art AI here because Kelly said she laid in her bed and kind of near that closet door, almost like a rectangle opened up on the wall, almost like a screen. And there appeared a woman that was very angelic. So this is my art AI version of this. So does that look exactly like her?
Well, we'll go with that.
Okay. That was the least creepy one that I could select. But anyway, but just to the idea, it was a woman, and the woman introduced herself with a name that started with like a hard Q or a hard K, and Kelly said her mouth didn't open, but she knew she was speaking, and she was never able to even repeat what the name was. It was almost like it was a language that her mouth was unable to form. But the woman said very clearly, or conveyed the message very clearly, I am here for you. I'm here to support you. I love you unconditionally. And Kelly had a very strong feeling of peace and unconditional love. And it happened to happen around a time where she was having some very difficult times in her life, and she really felt supported by this guardian angel figure. And it even happened again at somebody else's house, where she again came to her. It was another time of turmoil in her life and expressed, I'm here for you. So that was a really peaceful and calming feeling for Kelly, to know that that person was there. And I think a lot of us feel like we have guardian angels watching out for us, or wish we did. So it was a great story. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. You did that wonderfully. You really did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I know it's a little scary when the people in the room are actually here, and I've got a few of those. So Kelly connected me with another lady named Geraldine. She was absolutely lovely, like really sweetness and light, and but very, very, very spiritual. And she shared with me what some of her gifts were, that she has a lot of the clairs that are on your page, clairsentience, claircognizant. And she worked at St. Joe's at one point, as did Kelly actually, and they had some paranormal activity up there with things moving around, secretary, like some of the things on the secretary's desk would move around, and it was becoming upsetting to some people who were working there and people who were trying to heal there. So Geraldine had a conversation with the spirits there, and she said, you need to stop doing this. Like, you're welcome to stay here. She's always very respectful when she communicates with the spirit world. She said, you are welcome to stay here, but you cannot interfere with the healing that's going on here. This is a place of healing. There are people rehabilitating here, and you cannot interfere with that. And that did, in her experience too, when she has these conversations with the spirit world, it did quiet things down. She also believes that there are portals. Do you guys know what a portal is? So like those of you who are familiar with paranormal terminology, a portal is where like the veil between the spirit world and the physical world is thin. And around, that's where a lot of people believe like the spirits can pass from one world to the other, and there tends to be a lot of spiritual activity around a portal. In this case, she said there's a healing portal up near St. Joe's, and that's why they have such a successful treatment rate. Now, you may have seen this at this house. I was like, this one. So, real quick. I have seen the documentary on this. I have not spoken to the people that live there, or that own the house. I did speak to Geraldine, though, who did live there for quite a while. And I think maybe 5 years she was there. Geraldine has like absolutely no fear of the spirit world, by the way, at all. Like, she believes it's all entirely positive. And I think actually most people that I've spoken to who do interact a lot or do paranormal investigations will say that it is almost entirely, or very generally, almost always positive. Did I say that right? I said that weirdly. I meant to say generally very positive. That like this kind of TikTok culture of everything's a demon and everything's negative and everything's dark is not accurate, and it really misrepresents what is going on. So she had a similar experience on Cliff Road in that she was asked to calm down the spiritual activity there by tenants who were frightened. There have been things happening, and she helped them. So she had a nice conversation and said, you need to stop it. Again, you're welcome to stay here, but you need to stop bothering the people that live here. Now, Geraldine also, like I said, she had some paranormal abilities, that she would sense things. So she was in a room that she was asked to settle down, and it was very, very cold. And she had like a vision. There was actually a closet there. She went into the closet. It was extremely cold in the closet, and she had a vision that there were, they had kept bodies in that place, which is possible. It was, it was a cure cottage. A lot of people, I did contact Emily here, and she had said there are so many names that are associated with this house, I couldn't possibly list them all. And it's theoretically possible that people died there, and that perhaps bodies had been kept there. So that was Geraldine's very strong sense that maybe they were being kept there temporarily until it was, they were able to be transported somewhere else, or until they were able to be buried. And she again had a conversation with the spirits there and said that I apologize if you were ever mistreated, or if you ever felt like your body was not treated the way you wanted to be, or even if just your life experience here was negative for you. But she encouraged them to enter the light and to move on and pass to the next pass to the other side. And after that, she confirmed that people who lived in that space felt that it felt warmer, the temperature shifted, and that it just felt like a more comfortable place to live. All right. Cabin fever. Now, this goes back to Melissa again, the creepy carnival woman who had the one who I said had the children, who saw the man dancing under the light. So she was a college student, and she had just moved into cabins that were used for tuberculosis treatment a long time ago. There was this really old cabin. It was really cheap. She was really excited to move in there. She could afford it. And she said it was very spare. There wasn't much there. And she invited a friend over, and his name was Cole. And she said, come check out my new cabin in the Adirondacks. It's great. And Cole didn't come. He blew her off, and he ended up not coming. So she went to bed, and she was sleeping, and she woke up suddenly to the sound of the door of her cabin opening. What happened to my bed? There it is. To the door of the cabin opening, and she heard slippers on a hardwood floor, which she said was really weird because she had wall-to-wall carpeting. And a guy's voice came up to her and said, "It's me. It's Joel." And she thought it was Cole. She's like, "Oh, this is my friend. I guess he's, it's late, but here he is." And she actually, I forgot to say one thing, that she had horrendous allergies. It was the fall, and she was having allergies that were so bad she had to be hospitalized. So she was wheezing like crazy when she went to bed that night. And this arm, this hand caresses her arm and says, "It's okay. You're going to be okay." And she felt that this was somebody that maybe thought she had tuberculosis. That wheezing that she was doing triggered this spirit to come in and caress her arm and tell her it's going to be okay. Because when she opened her eyes, there was no one there, no Cole, no Joel. Then a couple of weeks later, she was dreaming, and there were like spider webs, and she said she was flailing her arm around in her dream, trying to wipe these spiders out of her face. And she smacked herself in the arm so hard that she woke herself up. And when she awoke, and she swears she was wide awake, she opened her eyes, and she said that there was a man standing over her. And she said he had fully shaven head, that his eyes were all black around the rims. He looked very ill. And he was standing over her, but his feet went through the bed, like right through her. Freaky, right? And then he just fell forward. She compared it to a compass needle. He fell forward like a compass needle and fell right through her. I don't know. I'm looking at you like you guys think that was creepy. I thought it was creepy. I'm like, you're all just looking at you like, what? So he fell right through her and disappeared. And that was it. She didn't last much longer after that. She said she could never sleep with lights on in that cabin again. She went to the landlord and said, "Is this place haunted?" And she said, "Why would you say that?" The landlady got very, very defensive, and she moved out within a week. She said she couldn't sleep there anymore. All right. So I've got another college spirit story. Melissa was a young college student. And so, and I can't stand in front of the leg. So was, there. Back. So was Mary, or so were Mary and Colleen. So they're also local residents here. Mary owns Inner Quest Yoga Studio. So I asked Mary, I always ask people, do you think you have spirits, are you sensitive to spirits and sensitive to this kind of thing? And she said, of course, I'm a yoga teacher. That's like what I do as a living. And she also had a couple of other stories, personally, not related to the one I'm going to tell you, that indicated that she has some sensitivity. And so did her roommate, Colleen. In fact, her roommate, Colleen, worked at Uline in Lake Placid, and she saw an apparition of a nun working at Uline who had been killed in a car accident who worked at Uline. But that's for the Lake Placid book, so I'm not going to tell that tonight. Mary also said that when she was at her yoga studio, they would occasionally smell things. At about 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon, they would smell food. And it wasn't just her. It was the massage therapist and somebody else who worked there. They would smell food around 4 or 4:30. And it smelled like, she described it as hash and potatoes, which was sort of an odd smell. They weren't cooking. Nothing was happening in the yoga studio. But it did turn out that there was a cure cottage there before the yoga studio was there called the Dewey Cottage. And there was also, this is Joe Walsh, who was the caretaker of Knollwood, and he also lived there. Spirits can transcend buildings. So just because the yoga studio stands there now doesn't mean that the spirits of a previous building can't still be occupying that space. So it seemed like that was maybe a residual energy or something like that of the cure cottage that was there, that daily cooking. But the real story is this. Colleen and Mary lived in this old building, which is in the old military estates complex. You guys know where that is, but it's up on Old Military Road. And they moved in there as young college students, and they were excited and they loved the place right away, and they took lots of happy pictures. And her mom, though, right away, and she said her mom had a sixth sense, said, this place, there's something not right about this place. And they were like, yeah, Mom, whatever. So within a couple of days of moving there was an ambulance parked there with no lights on. And they found out that a woman who had lived in the building had died there. And she'd actually been there for about a week before they found her. So that was like sort of an upsetting thing that happened. But, they were young girls and they were like, okay, they moved on with their lives. But another college student moved into the apartment that the old lady had lived in. And they were all hanging out one night. And this is a up-to-date picture of what the place looks like now. It's still there. It's kind of creepy. So the girls were all hanging out doing things that college girls do. And the new girl, Leslie, said, something really strange keeps happening in my house. She said, every time I close the cabinet doors in the kitchen, they open again. And they kind of laughed and they, so you're being silly. And they closed all of the cabinet doors firmly, and the girls left the room. And they came back a couple of minutes later, all the cabinets were open. And they're like, well, that's strange. Because then they remembered that the lady's daughter had told them that her mother had arthritis. And she always left all of the cabinet doors open because she didn't have the hand strength to pull them and open them. So perhaps that's what was happening. These cabinet doors were still opening even after the lady had passed. They had other experiences in the house. They would see people, they would sit in front of the window and they would see ghostly figures kind of going by the window, sort of checking them out, looking at them through the window, and they'd be looking at them. Colleen shared a story of her dog. She had a yellow lab she came home one day, and the dog, now if you have a yellow lab, this isn't that unbelievable, but I will tell you more about it in a second. The dog had its head shoved into a dog biscuit box and couldn't get out. Now, that's believable behavior from a lab. But Colleen said no. She's like, I know that. She's like, I've had tons of dogs. She said this dog's head was shoved so far into this box, she had to use scissors to cut it out. And she said the dog was terrified. She's like, this wasn't a dog that was excited to get a dog biscuit. So she was concerned about that. She felt that this was a bad sign that this happened to her dog. They were starting to get worried. They also had another experience, constant experiences, where there would be loud knocking at the front door or the back door, and they would go and say, is anybody there? Is anybody there? But there was never anybody there. And that happened time and time again, where this knocking would happen. So they did find a closet full of stretchers in the hall, in a closet in the hallway. They thought that this house was associated with the military because it was the old military estates, but there's actually no historical evidence that the military ever occupied there. It wasn't a veterans home. We think that it was just named for the street. So we're not sure what the stretchers were. It's possible they were connected to the patients that lived there, because there's no question that they had tuberculosis patients there at one time. But the girls didn't even last the school year, and they moved out. All right, so my next story, oh, that's the back, creepy looking place, right? I hope nobody lives there and I'm insulting you. Right, nobody lives there, good. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this one I call Happy at Home, and the people who own this home are here in the building with us today, or here in the room with us tonight. And their names were Chris and Jen. Raise your hand, Chris and Jen, say hi. There they are. So Chris and Jen, like John and I, when they saw their house, they fell immediately in love with it. They had actually, it was back in the day when, like Kelly too, right? Back in the day where they didn't even have the internet, like they had to get a printout, and they got a big packet of houses, and Jen saw this house, I think it was on the top, pointed at it and said, "That's the one." And Chris was like, "Don't you think we should look through the other ones in the packet?" And she's like, "Nope, this is it." So they ended up buying the house, and they also lovingly restored this house. Brought it back. It had all kinds of 1960s and 70s, improvements, shag carpet and horrible paneling and things like that. So they removed all of that. They put built-ins back in where they belong, molding back in where it belonged. They painted the walls beautiful colors, terracotta and blue, as I remember, and really just made the place much more in character of probably the way it was when it was first built. They also resurrected the tradition of having boarders. They invited, just like when it was a tuberculosis cottage and it would have had people coming there to stay, they did that also. They had college students and temporary town residents come to stay in the house. And it was, by all accounts, was a wonderful, loving place. It was the place they decided to have their family, and they stayed there for many years. Now, Chris, though, at some point, began to have an experience where he would see a shadowy figure. This is not a real picture. I've not been in the house, so this is another dramatic recreation. But he would be sitting in the family room, and there was a doorway, and he would see beyond the doorway in the dining room a shadowy figure pass by the door. And if he tried to really look at it, it would go away. But he could see it in the corner of his eye. So this is my recreation. How's that, Chris? Very accurate? Yeah? Exactly like that. Something like that. So anyway, he would be sitting there, but he would sense the need to look. And when he would look, the shape would be there. And then when he would really look, the shape would disappear. It would actually kind of move in the other direction behind the door where he couldn't see it. So he was never alarmed. It was about 4 feet high or so, and he had the sense that it was the spirit of a little girl. Now, time went by, and despite their deep affection for the house, Chris and Jen decided to sell the house. They built another house. They were builders. And although they had countless cherished memories there, they decided it was time to move on. But in the meantime, something strange happened. A friend of theirs called, and he said, "I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I found these 2 photograph books." And these are the actual books. And they've got pictures of Saranac Lake in them. And they're like, "Oh, that's cool." And he said, "Do you want me to send them to you?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, send them to us, please." So they arranged to gave money, arranged to have them sent up, paid for the photograph albums. And the photograph albums arrived, and sure enough, they're full of photographs of Saranac Lake from about 1910 to about 1913. So they're very, very old photos. There was this panoramic one in there that looks like one that we've seen. I've seen this on the Historical Society website. I don't think it's this one, but similar. There were carnival pictures in there. There's the carnival of 1913 coming down, some parade floats, horses coming down Main Street. There's another float from the time period. This, I think, is a never before seen photo of the 1913 ice castle. Look how they built them in those days before liability.
Well, and they had the ice.
and before global warming. Good point. So this, and Alex felt this was the last year that they built one up on the hill.
It was 1913.
1913, yeah. So they stopped building them up. They moved the location shortly after that. There's also, I wish I could do a whole night just on these photo albums. This is Ed Lamy, though. There are beautiful photos of Ed Lamy jumping barrels. Norton, another speed skater. So it had a lot of really fun carnival things in it. The Trudeau's home, yeah. That the photographer took pictures of people curing in the area. And we even found out that, even 100 years ago, people liked to drive around with Adirondacks on their cars, dorky tourists. There was even a picture of Edward and Lottie Trudeau in their wagon. This, we believe very strongly to be the photographer. And his name, I'm 99% sure, was Herbert Davis. And we know that from some various clues in the book, one of which was a postcard that was addressed to him. And so Herbert had tuberculosis, and he was curing in Saranac Lake, and he documented the places where he cured, because there are also photos in there of Colorado Springs, of Asheville, North Carolina, of Taos. So he was on the cure circuit, and Saranac Lake was one of his stops. And whenever he would go anywhere, he would take pictures of the other cure cottages that he stayed in and the ones around him. And at the time that Chris and Jen lived in this house, at the time that Herbert was in Saranac Lake, there were about 5 houses on Chris and Jen's block, and 4 of them housed tuberculosis patients, including their house, and including the one that Herbert was staying in. So he has about 5 houses in this entire album of Saranac Lake houses, and all of them were right on Chris and Jen's block. So imagine that. Their friend down in Virginia finds this album, sends it to them, and they look in it, and there's their house and the other houses on them. So this is actually not their house. This is the Kennedy cottage, which is 2 doors down from Chris and Jen. This is porch of the Kennedy. Those of you who are history buffs, you're going to love these photos. These are some of the people that the photographer was friendly with. He would always write their names and where they were from and show them doing different things. Bobbing, he called that, in their fur coats. They're just incredible pictures, and there are dozens of them. I wish I had time to show them all. We also believe that he was probably staying in this cottage also. So HSL was able to confirm that Herbert Davis did stay in the Kennedy cottage for sure. But we think that he may have stayed here too, because he said, this is across from Chris and Jen's, and he said, view from my room. And if you stand like where those windows are, the view that he shows, do I have it? There, is, very much from that perspective. So we're pretty sure that that's where he may have stayed too. There's no record that I could find of that, but perhaps he switched houses or something. We don't really know. But just backing up, he stayed in this house. We think that's his room, which I thought was such a great intimate portrait. Mm-hmm. This is a then and now photo of the Leonard Cottage, where we think he also stayed. Shepherd Avenue. You can see how the landscape has changed if you know the area. But there's Chris and Jen's house, the green one. And I want you to notice the stone wall that's in front of it, because this was a very remarkable photo to them, because Chris took one look at that photo and he said, there's my ghost girl. Oh, wow. He just felt it in his soul, in his heart, right? That this was her, and that's their wall. That's his house. That's their stone wall, and there she is sitting on it. Now, it was a remarkable photo also. Go ahead. No, jump in.
I was going to say, you're about to say it.
Okay. It was the only photo in the album that they could tell that was reversed. So it was backwards. He's like, there's something strange about that. And then he noticed, like he printed this photo backwards. So I reversed it. And you can see now on the left is the way it looks in the album, which is backward. On the right is the way it should look. And this is the way it looks now. So they're sitting basically on that, like where that snowbank is. You can, if you look, I'll give you a second to look at it. You can see how they're sitting right there, right in front of Chris and Jen's steps. That was pretty amazing. I did find her elsewhere in the album, though, and I wrote to them and said, I think I know her name. Charlotte and Louise. So we're pretty sure that the little girl's name was Louise. Charlotte, I haven't been able to find any record of Louise. We don't know if she was curing, if she was visiting the neighborhood. We really don't know anything about Louise right now. Charlotte, though, there's evidence that this is Charlotte Kennedy, who would have lived in the Kennedy cottage. She was about 6 years old at this time, probably about the same age as Louise. And I did find census records that list her and her age and her parents. The Kennedys owned that cottage that's 2 doors down from Chris and Jen that Herbert stayed in. And there are other pictures in the album of the little girl. She was clearly well loved. We don't know who her family was or anything, but they're always holding her, sitting with her. She may be, I found a Dr. Cook, and she may be connected to him because there were a couple of photos where she was with that family. So to continue Chris and Jen's story, though, so that was like this amazing thing, though, like where they felt like these albums were almost sent to them. And they were closing on their house, and they had a neighbor's friend over. A neighbor's child over. And the little boy, as they are sitting with the new owners and like trying to sign all the papers, and the little boy gets injured and they have to rush him to the hospital. And while they were gone, their child sat there with the owners and said, "Oh, things like this happen in the house all the time. People are always getting hurt. People are getting injured." In fact, should I share the other detail? In fact, my brother's placenta is buried under the bush in the backyard. So by the time they got back from the hospital, they were lucky that the people still wanted to buy the house. But they did. And one of the first things they did was add locks to the doors because Chris and Jen didn't even have keys. And they started painting everything white. So they were kind of taking all of the beautiful colors and everything that Chris and Jen had painted the house, and they were just painting everything white and changing it. And Chris and Jen had this sense that maybe the house wasn't too happy about it. I feel like this is as much a story of the little ghost girl as it's a story of the house and the way the house tries to connect with them. So Jen went back one time to pick up belongings, and the new owners were there, and he's painting. And as she picks up her belongings, this is where the story gets really weird, so just brace yourself, right, Jen? And she sees the guy's painting. Imagine he's painting. This isn't a real picture from the house, but you get the idea. And she sees a bullfrog on the ground, big, huge bullfrog, and it's jumping. It's jumping up the wall and sliding down the wall, and jumping up the wall and sliding down the wall. And they look at it, they're like, what the heck is that? They see this bullfrog, this makes no sense. They're nowhere near the lake. The doors were closed and locked. And then they notice that the bullfrog is leaving like pink streaks down the wall. It didn't have any front legs. Like the front legs were like bloody and missing. So like gross. Like why? So, and the man was like, "Did you put that frog there?" And Jen's like, "Of course I didn't put that frog there. What are you talking about?" And she left promptly. And you said you never really found out why the frog was there. There was no explanation for it. Who knows? But we maybe conclude maybe it's the house. Maybe, I don't know. Like what would cause that frog to be there? But it certainly didn't make the new owners too happy. What do you guys think? Thoughts? Wasn't a ghost? No, not a ghost frog.
It was a real frog.
It was a real frog.
I picked it up and threw it out the door.
question definitely real. Oh, that's for you, Chris and Jen. I added that slide here. All right. Got a couple more stories for you, and then we can have a Q&A, and if people want to share their stories with me, we can do that too. So, you guys have all heard of Hotel Saranac, right? There's no question. We've heard about this one. Lots of haunted history. I don't know if you know that the man who built the Hotel Saranac, though, was a TB patient himself.
It's the hot Sarah.
What's that?
It's the hot Sarah.
It is the hot Sarah. This is hot Sarah. That's why I said hot and haunted Sarah. So.
Oh, look at you go. Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So anyway, the man who built this hotel, he actually had tuberculosis. But then when he built the hotel, he wouldn't allow tuberculosis patients in the door, which I think was bad, probably bad karma. And it turned out to be a bit of a financial failure for him when people asked, they asked him, how is the project going? He would hold like a noose over his head and he said, I'm going to have this thing around my neck until the day I die. So it didn't work out so well for him. But there are a lot of spirits happening at the Hotel Saranac. They did such a beautiful job recreating a palace in Italy. And of course they've renovated it and made it beautiful again. Now, the hotel was built on the site of an old high school. So this is what was there before. And if you're in the Hotel Saranac and you spot a distinguished-looking man in a black suit with tails and a top coat, usually deep in the basement, sometimes deep in the basement of the hotel, you may have met Howard Littell. And he was the superintendent of schools around the turn of the century. And I've heard from a couple of people who feel they have encountered Howard. Now, one is Sue. Is Sue still here? Did she have to go? Yeah, there's Sue. One is Sue, who's here tonight. Now, Sue was the head of housekeeping at Hotel Saranac. And one night she was there. There were 3 people in the building. Sue, the front desk attendant, and a maintenance worker. And Sue hears someone walking in the basement. And she thought, I can't have that. So she went down to investigate. And she saw someone in a tall hat, long pants, and with kind of noisy heels on his boots. And she could hear him walking. And she said, sir, you can't be here. And he scooted around the corner. So she followed him. And of course, when she went around the corner, there was nobody there. So she checked up on the main floor with the worker at the desk. He looked at her like she had 2 heads. He hadn't seen anything. She walked the hotel with the maintenance man who was there. They didn't find anybody. But later she found a photo of Howard Littell in the clothing that she had seen this man in the basement, and made her feel strongly that it was him. So another time, Sue was part of a paranormal investigation at the hotel, and they had a new team member in training. This was with the Adirondack Park Paranormal Society. They had a new team member in training who was a teacher. So they conducted a mock interview with the spirit. And we'll call them APS from here on in, Adirondack Park Paranormal Society. They use a lot of different equipment, and they do that partly to back up what they find. So if multiple pieces of equipment react to the presence of a spirit, that indicates that there's really something going on. This spirit was very responsive, so they conducted a mock interview with Jen, this new team member, who was a teacher. And they had a lot of back and forth, right? Do you want to quickly tell us what happened, Sue?
Certainly. Well, since she was a teacher, I thought, and the history that I have with Mr. Littell, he's very strict, very matter of fact, and she taught the same way. So I said, well, let's have you ask the questions. We had a K2 meter, we had REM pods, we had dowsing rods, and recorders. And we had put a top hat that we had found in an antique store out as kind of a trigger object. And so Jen gave her qualifications and asked, would you hire me? Well, the K2 meter went to red, which means there's a strong EMF field and an electromagnetic field in the room. The dowsing rods crossed immediately at the same time. And she said, are you looking for English teachers? It crossed, the dowsing rods crossed again, and the K2 maxed out. So the conversation went on. She gave her background, would you be happy with this? Maxed out again. And then one of the other members in the group thought she was being funny. And she goes, I'm an accountant, you need me too? We lost all communication. The rods didn't work, the recorder didn't work, nothing worked, everything stopped. that interview was over.
So don't mess with Dr. Littell. That is Dr. Littell. He was at that high school and working for the Saranac schools for many years, like a few decades actually. So I think this is a little later in his life, like when he wasn't wearing top coats and top hats anymore, perhaps. Melissa, again, I keep coming back to Melissa. That girl really loves the ghostly activity. But she also worked at Hotel Saranac. She said the more they talk about it over there, the more things happen. She shared stories of bear-shaped salt shakers flying across off the hostess stand. She saw the apparition of a lady walk through the lobby in a very straight line and then walk through the door, but the revolving doors never moved. So that was interesting. Another time she was gathering supplies in the closet on the second floor, and she tried, they had automatic lights, and she was trying to get the lights to go on, and for some reason the lights would not go on for her, although they normally would. So she was working in the dark, and she heard a utensil fly across the kitchen and land in the dishwashing pit. And when she was able to check it out later, there was no sign of any utensils. She was in a closet there and gathering supplies, again, a dark closet. And as she went to leave, a stool had blocked the door, preventing her from leaving the closet, which she thought was very odd. She didn't make that happen. So she went down to her supervisor and she said, I have to tell you what happened. I just had a stool block my way when I tried to leave the closet upstairs. And her supervisor said, well, thank goodness. And she's like, what? She said, because that happened to me 20 minutes ago, and now I know I'm not crazy. So it was a great story. Sue also had experiences in that kitchen that Melissa was talking about. It was a teaching kitchen at one time for Paul Smiths, and she would see a figure that would suddenly disappear.
Yeah, I'm assuming it was Dr. Peroni. She was basically the chef for Paul Smiths College for the bakery end of things. And again, I was inspecting. I was walking through the ballroom when I saw a woman in the kitchen all in, I call it bakery waste. And again, there shouldn't be anybody in there. Backed up, tried to peek, there was nobody there. Opened the door, walked through. Nope, still no husband.
So as head of housekeeping, Sue, you said that there were experiences on every floor. Housekeepers would report things grabbing at their ankles, like a cat. And there is a well-known ghost cat over at Saranac Lake, and the cat belonged to a long-term residence there. They would find perfect circles on well-made, recently made beds that looked like a cat had been laying on it, and would get complaints from guests who'd be like, the bed looks like something's been sitting on it. And they felt it was the cat. They also hear big band music playing at the hotel, even though there's no one in the building. And Christina, you're here, right, Christina? Still here? Right? Christina heard music playing in the ballroom and peeked in and saw ghostly figures dancing. Is that accurate? Did I describe that?
That is absolutely accurate.
And Christina also, she loves the vibe of Hotel Saranac so much that she hosts her Moonbow Metaphysical Spring Expo there. So that's coming up in March. So those of you who like...
We did one in November, we're doing
another one in March. Those of you who are interested in the metaphysical world, I encourage you to come out to that. The spirits seem to know Sue well from the time that she worked at the hotel. So the ACTS team was using something called a spirit box. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but the way that works is one team member is listening with headphones, so they can't really hear anything except the spirit box itself. I'm not going to go into like the technology of it, but the spirits can talk through it. So you can have one team member asking questions, the other team member has headphones on, they can't hear the questions, but they can hear the answers. So it helps to not contaminate their answers because they're not influenced by the questions. So Damon said to Sue, what are you telling them? Because the spirit box was going crazy. And it would say, Sue, Sue, Susie, Susan, Sue, Susie, Sue, like that. And she said, oh, I asked them if they remembered me. And they remembered her indeed. So old-fashioned music plays on the 6th floor a lot, which might be explained. I looked up the original plans of the hotel, and they did have like a glassed-in garden and lots of dancing and musical events at the top floor. My final Hot Sarah detail tonight deals with an investigation that happened with the apps team and their experiences on the 4th floor. They had a door that was propped open, slammed shut violently, and found out that there had been a long-term resident there in life who was sort of a cranky guy, so apparently he may have been cranky in death as well. And then they had another experience where they were walking down a dark hallway and somebody said, "What room are we on?" And a team member lit a lighter to look, and she immediately felt like this like heavy pressing kind of on her chest. She felt very heavy and fell to the ground. And they think what happened was that there had been someone who lived in that room who had died of a heart attack from smoke inhalation. There had been a fire.
He panicked.
He panicked.
Actually, the fire was down on the main floor. It didn't even reach his floor.
And the smoke came up through the stairwell.
And he panicked and had
So they think the lighting of the fire may have been a trigger incident for that particular spirit, and that's why that team member felt that kind of heavy, foreboding feeling. No one, though, seems to feel that the spiritual activity at the hotel is particularly dangerous or a danger to any workers or guests or anything. And if anybody wants to come check it out, John and I are going to be going over to the bar after this so. To investigate. And we would be happy to see any of you there, and hope we do. So my final things, I know we started a little late, and I appreciate your patience. I want to share a couple more things with you, though, that have to do with paranormal investigations, as I promised in the advertisement for this. This is Red Gables. Have anyone ever heard an EVP, like an electronic voice phenomenon? Thank you. So Sandy, she's actually a member of the apps team, was staying here at Red Gables, which is a former Pure Cottage, very recently. There it is. I just took that picture the other day. Beautiful blue sky. This is what it looked like years ago. There's actually a brick here in historic Saranac Lake that represents someone who cured there named Maud Kirk. But this is the EVP that Sandy and her husband picked up recently. Now, I want to tell you, if you've never heard one before, they're not always crystal clear. Like, you have to kind of listen through static, and you have to, listen very, very carefully. In fact, they're rarely crystal clear. But you definitely can hear something if you listen carefully. Come back. Sorry, I lost my arrow. Okay, maybe we're not going to be hearing it, but we are. Let me get it. Up there it is. It's back.
Was this a happy place to be?
So hard to hear. You hear.
We know there were a lot of houses here that tried to help a lot of sick people.
All right, we're going to try again. You
Was
hear
this
like.
a happy place
like,
to be?
Ooh, like almost got a conversation.
We know there were a lot of houses here that
Did
tried
you hear
to
that? Yeah, so it's like you hear, it's not clear. If it was super clear, we'd all be just like, recording, using our recorders to talk to grandma, right? And be like, hey, they're not that easy to hear, but if you listen, you can hear, you can definitely hear some things. Let me see if I can find the other one. I'm not sure why this isn't working for me. Again, it's the ghosts. They don't they interact with us using technology. All right, we're gonna let that go. But it was something similar to that. You could hear moaning. It was like almost like singing that she was able to hear. And then this one, this was an Art Rise, which if I go like, you can see me circle. That is where the Art Rise building used to be in like Newberry's, and that was a Pure Cottage. And you can hear. This is clearer. Now we're getting like a little weird feedback. Yeah, it's not working. Wow. What's going on, friends? All right, well, that one, you hear it, the spirit says arrogant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I apologize, I can't hear it, but I don't want to waste your time trying to make it work, but he says arrogant. So the spirit did not like that investigator too much. What's the main reason the paranormal investigators do it in the dark? Is it ghosts like the dark better? They can't afford to pay their electric bills? It's spookier that way, or none of the above? All of the above. Or all of the above. The answer is none of the above, but I've not done a lot of paranormal or any paranormal investigations, but they turn the lights off. They don't just do it to be spooky, but it's so that the electricity in the room doesn't interfere with their equipment, because they're trying to detect electromagnetic fields. So that's a little ghost hunting trivia. This is the Union Station. So there's so much activity here that the APS group would use to train new members there, because they said if you can handle the spirit activity that's happening in this place, you can handle anything. So some of the things that they've had happen, there is a piano. They often hear a ghostly piano, like player piano playing, although there hasn't been a piano in the station since the 1960s. They have had lights swing, but not just swing back and forth like there's a breeze, but like swing in multiple directions at one time, which is not something that would normally happen, short of in an earthquake. Lots of EVPs there, lots of energy. Damon calls it the gateway for the living and the dead, because so many people came to town and so many people left town, as I said here earlier, on what was sometimes called the night train. This is the lights. And then they're even in the basement. That's a coal furnace in the basement. There's a lot of energy in the basement, a kind of angry energy that they feel could be the men that were down there who would shovel coal. That's pretty interesting. My final couple of stories are from some things that they experienced at Trudeau Sanatorium, which I think most of you know is where Edward Livingston Trudeau would welcome patients and treat them. And it grew up to be a very big complex. Some of those buildings are still there. Not all of them, not nearly all of them, but some of them. Some great old pictures of what it looked like once. So this is Dodd. Oh, sorry, thank you. It's good to have people in the room. This is James. So that's where doctors would live and doctors would cure, because many of the doctors that worked at Trudeau Sanatorium had tuberculosis themselves. So this is a beautiful picture I took the other day. You could see the beautiful cure porches back there. So APS, when they were there, they had a lot of activity, but I want to share one particular thing as we wrap up. This is a photograph with an anomaly in it. What do you guys see? That's what it looked like. I don't know. Anybody?
Ninja Turtle.
What's that?
Yeah.
To me, it looks like a very small man on a bicycle. I don't know. Sue, what do you guys think?
I honestly thought it was one of the old doctors leaning over on a cane.
I can see that.
That's definitely a face.
Yeah, right? I hear people giving their theories on what they see. Pretty interesting. Okay, now they also, this is Animal House. So Animal House was where they would perform experiments on animals trying to find a cure for tuberculosis. It's okay, there's nothing horrible, I'm not going to say anything bad. She's like, no. Well, but your reaction is interesting because it sort of relates to the spirit that they interacted with there. The team found that in Animal House, the equipment went crazy, like really, like...
There's no power in the building.
Yeah, no power in the building, but massive electromagnetic reaction. And the APS team, they try to create like a holistic picture. They use equipment to get data, like electric magnetic field. They use recorders, they use cameras, they use lots and lots of different pieces of equipment to help back up what they're finding. But they also have some psychic mediums on the team who, like Christina, who's with us tonight, and Sandy, who was the one who had that EVP and that at Red Gables, because they feel like it's important to tell that story as well. And that most people know that their dwelling or wherever they are is haunted, but they want to know who's haunting it and why and what's going on, and having that additional element of having a medium or someone that can communicate more directly or hear or see or know things about the spirits helps round out the picture. And one of the things that they sensed when they were in Animal House was the spirit of a young man who was very desperate, very sad,
Mixed emotions.
a lot of emotions and guilt. He felt guilty because perhaps he was very concerned about the animals. I mean, this is way before ethical treatments of animals, and they were trying, frankly, to find a cure for a disease that affected like 1 in 7 people in the world. It was a horrendous. They called it the White Plague. It was absolutely. It sort of would be amazing to us to understand how prevalent it was. I believe a statistic that I found was there were more people who had tuberculosis at the time than all of the cancer and heart disease patients in this country combined, percentage-wise. So it was very, very prevalent, and the desperation to find a cure was very, very intense. So experimenting on animals at that time was justified to the people who were doing it. So I'm not trying to say they were doing anything terrible to animals, but this young man was feeling a lot of guilt and feeling like down to the place
Yes.
because of that feeling. That was their sense. So there's one of the pieces of equipment. And then
that was also a folder and setup as well. Like we haven't even started the investigation yet.
Oh, okay. Wow. So, and my final piece is at Dodd, which is the administration building. Some beautiful pictures of that. The original workers working on it in 1898. So they had some more anomalies in photographs. You can see some orbs on the ceiling there. And this, again, you can see like in one picture to the next, there's like this sort of light figure sort of moving across the picture that they weren't able to explain. So, I mean, if skeptics are always easy to be like, it's dust, it's this, it's, something was on the, I mean, you used to say something was on the negative. You wouldn't say that anymore. But when a team finds things that they can't explain.
We're quick to debunk.
Yes, very quick. I find at certain teams, not every team, but at that team, it's very quick to debunk.
Which is why you still see them.
But this wasn't something they felt they could debunk. And then finally, Sue, you're here. You were in Dr. Trudeau's office, and you had a very strong feeling there. Do you want to tell us about that?
We were sitting doing a normal EVP and asking him questions, and for some reason, those of us that are more sensitive than I mean, everybody's sensitive, but there are times that you become wrapped up. And I did the research prior to the investigation, which we don't share with the investigators, so they don't come in with blinders on. But I felt a connection to Dr. Trudeau and his desperate need to find, with everything he went through himself.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that connection, which happens sometimes when I'm researching, I could almost physically hear him while we were doing EVP saying, I am so tired. I'm so physically tired, but I've got to find a cure. We've got to help these people. And I relayed that while they were asking the questions, and I was exhausted. I was done. I just could crawl up in a hole anywhere on that campus. I would have fallen asleep. But I could feel his deep, deep emotion and his drive and his want to do this. But I'm pretty sure at that point where I was channeling, it was towards the end of his career, end of his life.
Thank you. Very powerful. I'm currently reading this book by Mary Hoadley.
Yes.
And I will tell you that this portrait, those eyes follow you everywhere. when I have that book like propped up on my windowsill and I was like cheating on it the other day with another book, I felt compelled to apologize. I'm like, I'm sorry, Dr. Trudeau. I'm like, I'm coming back to you, I promise. But it's a great book. But I'm actually going to play
You want to come back to the house?
a little
We're just coming over.
quick video of that
We're just coming
equipment.
through
As our
tonight to visit and see who's here. Do you want us to come back at some point and talk to you more? This is crazy. I haven't seen it spike like this. All night.
Power in this building.
No.
Not up here.
Controlled because of something the doctor did. Or wanted to do.
I think she's scared. I don't think necessarily the male and female body.
Over the wall.
Is this the charger? Are you patrolling the floor? Are
So,
you making sure
I'm
everybody?
gonna stop that. What's that? It's kind of double playing. It sounds weird. I'm not having any success with my playing of EVPs tonight, and we'll blame the spirits for that. But so what they were asking, they were talking to someone they felt was like a nurse.
Yeah, she was following us. Every time we went up on the floor, we had footsteps behind us.
And like almost like she was monitoring the floor and didn't want you there.
Yes.
So they go on to ask questions and say, do you want the men to leave? And it lights up like yes. And they're like, do you want the women to stay? And it goes off like no. And it's like, do you want us all to leave? And it lit up like yes. Like so the nurse was not too happy with you guys interrupting the workflow there.
We didn't belong.
So I'm going to close with a little excerpt from another Adelaide Crapsey poem, Overlooking Pine Ridge Cemetery. And after that, we can open up to questions and answers. And I'll do the best to answer questions. Written in a moment of exasperation. So Adelaide was curing and overlooking Pine Ridge Cemetery from her cure cottage. And she's talking to the people in their graves and says, because she, remember, they were asked as tuberculosis patients to lie still all the time. And she was frustrated with that as a young woman. And she said, how can you lie so still? All day I watch and never a blade of all the green sod moves to show where restlessly you toss and turn and fling a desperate arm or draw up knees, stiffened and aching from their long disuse. I watch all day and not one ghost comes forth to take its freedom at the midnight hour. Oh, have you no rebellion in your bones? Better it is to walk, to run, to dance. Better it is to laugh and leap and sing, to know the open skies of dawn and night, to move untrammeled down the flaming noon. I'll not be patient. I'll not lie still. So I thank you very much. I know we're a little over time. If you have to go, I won't be offended or upset, so please. But does anyone have any questions? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, if anybody would like to share stories with me, my email is on